the Trump administration has abandoned any sense of duty, responsibility, or leadership as it relates to the issues that bring us all here together. It's an abomination. It's a disgrace.
President Trump may not have made it to the COP30 climate conference, but California Governor Gavin Newsom did, using his appearance in Brazil this week to criticize the president's climate record and tout his own as he looks to establish himself as the face of the Trump resistance ahead of an expected 2028 presidential run. We are back with our panel. Monet, Gavin Newsom seems to be having a moment here. The polling shows he's leading in the in the beauty contest for who could be the nominee in 2028. Long way to go, but why is he having this moment?
Well, I think there are a lot of Democrats who are all competing with each other to be the leader of the resistance, so to speak, show that they can actually do something to frustrate and oppose President Trump's agenda. And Gavin Newsom, to his credit, pulled off a pretty spectacular win in that regard with Proposition 50 in California. So this basically was California voters allowing them to change their maps in a way that's going to let Democrats gain up to 5 new congressional seats in the 2026 midterms. They did this to retaliate against Texas, which President Trump had asked to draw new maps to allow them to gain 5 Republican seats. And so unlike the other candidates, Newsom will actually be able to say, I did something to make sure Democrats can take the Congress and we can actually stymie the Trump agenda instead of just criticizing him and fulminating against him.
So, Kim, if you look at Newsom here as he tries to lead the Democrats, what are his assets as a potential presidential candidate? What does he bring to the party against a Republican?
Well, I think Monet just pointed out that for a progressive base that only cares about fighting, he has that sort of spirit and a couple of wins under his belt, as it were. He's got national name recognition, which he has built up over the past couple of years by really setting himself as an antagonist of Republicans, other Republican governors, and now the president. He'll definitely have money. He'll have progressive support behind him. I think the problem that he's going to have is that he's got his record, right? We used to talk about the California dream, Paul. These days, California is a poster child for where middle-class dreams go to die. Terrible homelessness and lawlessness, the schools, terrible graduation rates, high cost of living. There's no affordable housing. It leads the nation in poverty. And that's a record that's going to be a little difficult for him to outrun. He might think that he can talk about this solely as being, again, opponent to Donald Trump. But I think Democratic voters are going to have to look at what he offers as an agenda. That's less clear.
So Kim stole a little bit of your thunder, Alicia, on the Newsom beat here with the California record, but he's going to say, look, we're booming, man. The state economy is great. Look at all of our fiscal. We're doing well on the fiscal side. The tech industry is booming. We're the dynamic, innovative energy part of the U.S. economy. What's your response to that?
Well, one, who knows what California's economy is going to look like in a few years if there's a recession. Almost all of its, or at least half of its income tax revenues come from the top 1% because of its heavily progressive tax system. So right now it's swimming in revenues because the stock market prices for NVIDIA, Google and others are pretty
Meta and all those
are pretty frothy. Now the other problem is, by the way, is energy. And it's interesting that he's now down in Brazil touting all these climate policies that are raising prices. I would say gasoline prices in California are $1.60 more than the nationwide average. When he came into the office, they were only $1 more. Electricity prices are the highest in the continental U.S., have increased 72% under his watch. That's not exactly making life more affordable, the buzzword for Democrats. And then you get into what Kim said is homelessness, right? It has the highest homeless rate or most numbers of homeless people in the country, in part because it makes housing so affordable with all these policies, local and state policies that raise the cost of building, and that includes high permitting costs and the state's California Environmental Quality Act. And even though Gavin Newsom is around there touting reforms, they were really de minimis, and they were intended really as window dressing. So the real problem is, as Democrats try to campaign on affordability, California is a poster child in unaffordability.
And Monet, I guess one of the questions the Democrats have to ask is, can Gavin Newsom, the ultimate coastal politician, can he appeal to middle America in those states that the Democrats need to win?
I definitely think that his primary rivals on the debate stage are going to be trying to make exactly that case. They'll point to the big scandal in 2020 where, while the state was locked down and no one was able to go out, Gavin Newsom was with his buddies having a birthday party at the French Laundry, one of the most expensive, exclusive restaurants in the country, and they'll try to tag him as an elitist snob. But he's pretty good, I think, frankly, on the stump, and I think that I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to make a pitch to working class voters on some of these grounds, position himself again as the biggest fighter against Trump, and you never know. I think it's possible that he could gain a following after all with a lot of these anti-Trump voters.
Yeah, well, it looks like the Democrats are really going to want to nominate somebody who is seen as a resistance figure, and that's the lane he is trying to dominate.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.